Welcome, everyone. Welcome. My name is Mike Anastasiades. I am a legal industry director with Hike2. Prior to Hike2, I spent about 10 years at Salesforce, helping to stand up their legal initiative and their legal industry initiative. And prior to Salesforce, worked at a law firm in Boston for about 6 years. We're really thrilled that you're here and want to welcome you to what we think is going to be a 3-day journey into what innovation could look like. We're going to have leaders the next few days talking about where business is headed tomorrow, where business is headed in the future. You're gonna see breakout sessions and be part of breakout sessions, panel discussions, workshops, led by over 40 separate industry experts. And some of the topics that you'll hear in some of these sessions will include design thinking, artificial intelligence, data, digital transformation. We think these sessions, part of our innovation summit, we think these sessions are great ways not only to learn, right, but to network. Network with your peers, network with industry leaders, network with each other, learn from each other, learn about modernization, learn about innovation. And we have a fabulous keynote on Wednesday, and Peter Mulford will actually be the keynote speaker. Peter Mulford is a Chief Innovation Officer at BTS, and the topic of Peter's session will be the true potential of artificial intelligence and its impact on the future of work. And we have another Peter Coffey, that's going to kick off our innovation summit in a minute or so. But before I get there, I do want to do just one sort of tactical thing here. During Peter Coffey's session, we are going to have live Q&A. So please go ahead and ask your questions in the Q&A functionality of Excel events, and we'll endeavor to answer those questions towards the tail end of today's session. And any questions we don't get to, we'll make sure that we get back to you with an answer. But let me formally kick this off and introduce Peter, who will actually do the kicking off. Peter Coffey is a Vice President of Strategic Research at Salesforce. Peter has an engineering degree from MIT, MBA from Pepperdine. He has been a faculty member at Pepperdine and UCLA. He's lectured at Stanford, at Caltech, at Harvard Business School. I keep going here. MIT Sloan School of Management. Amazing credentials. But the thing I'll say about Peter is, so again, I spent 10 years at Salesforce. If you were looking for a thought leadership person to present or come talk to a customer at Salesforce, the first person that you would go to would be Peter Coffey. And so he's not only one of the top thought leaders at Salesforce, I think he's one of the top thought leaders in the entire industry. So we look forward to seeing all of you tomorrow evening at our fabulous rooftop event, and Thursday too. And now let me formally hand this over to Peter Coffey, who's going to kick off our summit. Peter, take it away.
Mike, thank you for that very gracious welcome. I will try to live up to my hype. I'm conscious of the distinction between what we're doing today, which is the kickoff, as opposed to the keynote, because I really view it as my mandate today to be the frame, not the picture, to create the container in which what is going to follow over these next 2 days can be most usefully, mixed and used to create new value in people's minds, so that they can create new value for their stakeholders and customers. And so the title of this session today, Outcomes, Not Artifacts, is meant to emphasize the idea that innovation is so often viewed in terms of the object produced or the service performed, and it takes real intentionality to put yourself into the mind of the customer to see the need that is actually being met and not the object that is being delivered, to see the experience that is being enjoyed rather than just the activities that were performed. There's a wonderful scene in Batman Begins where Lucius Fox is describing the process of creating an antidote for a weaponized hallucinogen. At the end, Bruce Wayne says, "Was I supposed to understand any of that?" He says, "No, I just wanted you to understand how hard it was." And one of the things I often say to our account teams is, the customer doesn't want to know how hard it was. The customer wants to know, what did they get out of it? And the subtitle of the session, Tools, Multi-Tools, and Meta Tools, is going to be about some of the things I hope I'll be able to effectively share about what we need to construct for ourselves as the devices, the mechanisms, the behaviors, the networks that allow us as individuals and as organizations to become genuinely innovative and not merely inventive, not merely creative, but innovative. Now, what's the distinction there? There's almost a bumper sticker quotation from Peter Drucker that innovation is not invention. Well, okay, but that's a not statement. The rest of the statement is less often quoted, and it's harder to wrap your head around it when he says it is a term of economics rather than technology. And engineers and creative artists say, well, I'm not an economist. What are you talking about? Well, if you've ever taken any economics class ever, or even heard the word economics, you've probably heard of Adam Smith's book, usually referred to as The Wealth of Nations. That is not the complete title of the book. The full title is An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. And a book about the nature and causes is very different from a book about just the wealth itself. It actually leads to the question, well, if wealth is coming from something, does that something change over time? Are the mechanisms and the focal areas of innovation things that we need to expect will be different from one period to another? It will not always be the same thing? Because Adam Smith is famous for talking about the move from individual artisans to a factory system with specialization of tasks and equipment. His most famous anecdote is the pin making factory, where instead of one person making pins all day, you have a person who does wire drawing, a person who does wire straightening, a person who does grinding. John Gall once said, if you go to a shipyard, you will have a great deal of difficulty finding a shipbuilder. You'll find welders and carpenters and electricians and draftspeople and accountants, but you won't find a shipbuilder. The system is building the ships. Adam Smith's point about the pin factory is that the productivity was phenomenal. The gain over one person doing these things individually without particular skills or equipment, the gain was enormous. And in the 1700s and early 1800s, this movement from a craftsperson to a factory with specialization was a transformative cause of new wealth to be created. But that was then. Specialization isn't really an exciting idea. And the science fiction writer Robert Heinlein is famous for a long quotation about what a human being should be able to do. The list begins with change a diaper, includes cooking a meal, includes programming a computer, which, considering he wrote that in 1973, is pretty impressive. That he was thinking of that as a basic skill that a human being should have. But the bumper sticker line from Heinlein that many people in the science fiction community will certainly recognize immediately is specialization is for insects. The ability to be an innovator increasingly requires not being the world's most insightful expert in one particular area, not having the world's best soda straw through which to look at one particular thing, but really being able to see a bigger picture. Innovative teams increasingly will be those that can draw from diversities of knowledge. Jack Hughes, a top coder, has said, I rarely look to the existing discipline for new ideas. I have observed that if you've got a bunch of people who've been peer reviewing each other's research papers for 10 or 20 years, it doesn't really seem likely that you'll get a radical rethinking of the problem from that group. They've been polishing each other's work, not digging new ore out of the ground. Lee Smolin wrote a book called The Trouble with Physics about the orthodoxy of string theory, making it very difficult to have any genuinely new conversations, even in an area like physics where you expect people to be having brilliant insights. The observation made by Andy Boynton is that the kinds of connections are across not just disciplines, but complete silos of knowledge. We have a conference at Salesforce called Dreamforce, where my belief is that the reason to go to the physical event is not so much what's on the stages, but sitting on the lawn outside the Yerba Buena Center, having lunch with a radiation oncologist, a game theory expert, someone from the hospitality industry, someone from higher ed, someone from government, realizing that in many respects, you're all playing the same game of Monopoly, just pushing different pieces around a board with different names on the streets. But the fundamental challenges of getting an organization to free itself from the temptation to improve what it knows and to see the possibilities created perhaps by new technology, perhaps by new customer behaviors and mores, and to see the opportunity to meet a need in a genuinely different way. The essence of innovation, as I've suggested, does change over time. We can see this kind of decade by decade. If you look at the invention of the first transistor, going from a glass vacuum tube that had to be heated up to work to that first transistor, which is a very large device, a big device, about the size of a golf ball. Difficult to imagine how we go from there to transistors measured in nanometers. But in the 1950s, innovation was largely technology push from basic research, moving to solid state devices, being a noteworthy example, inventions in the area of pharmaceuticals being another. By the 1960s, a transistor was not particularly a novelty. This is an Air Chief 8 pocket transistor radio. It's got 8 transistors, where one had formerly been a laboratory curiosity. Now they were a mass market unit. But what was the innovation? The innovation is now that you can have a radio that isn't the size of a small bread box and needs to be plugged in to heat up its tubes. Now you can have a pocket-sized device that runs off a battery. You had new behaviors. You had people sitting in the bleachers at a baseball game, listening to the color commentary on the game that they were watching at the time. We think of this idea of multi-channel experience as being a novelty, and it's really been around for decades. And the enabling technology was 1950s. But the new behavior that created new innovation in the types of broadcast content that were offered, the types of advertising opportunity available to the sponsors of the programs, all of these things were now new opportunities for innovation. Then in the 1970s and 1980s, things got very interesting because now customers started being able to talk to each other. You had more and more opportunities for people to exchange opinions. And this device at the bottom left of the screen, that thing that looks like a black ball with Mickey Mouse ears on it, well, it's a transistor radio, technically. But if you look at some of the logos on it, it's got a Bluetooth logo. It's got a Wi-Fi logo. This was a critical transition where innovation now depended on your ability to interact with and share and create value with partners and networks. That if you were a brilliant idea that didn't connect to other useful ideas and experiences, you really didn't matter. Perfect example of this would be the Sony versus Panasonic war over video cassette formats. The Sony format, the U-matic format, was a definitely better recording technology. Higher quality recordings, no question. From an engineering point of view, it was a superior invention. But the VHS format had quality that was good enough, and unlike U-matic, which was limited to content less than an hour long, a VHS cassette could hold a full-length movie, which led to the emergence of the whole rental market and all of the other things that went with that technology before it was obviously supplanted by streaming. But the key is that it was able to become the kernel of a new ecosystem based on the experiences people wanted to have, which is the ability to watch a full-length movie at home. And so the invention from Sony really was pretty much seed strewn on rock. It just did not take off. Then something happened in the 2010s. It's difficult to remember that the first iPhone had no app store. In fact, when the first iPhone was introduced, Salesforce owned the name App Store. We gifted it to Apple later on. Try to remember that before the App Store, an unscheduled update to a piece of software was an admission of error on the part of the vendor, was an annoying nuisance to the customer. It was called a patch. There are still, Patch Tuesdays in the world, and we don't think of those as good things. But the idea that we would move to software being something that you could discover, download, that you expected to be improved continually at no cost, all of a sudden the floor of what constituted impressive innovative behavior rose dramatically. Merely offering new stuff frequently Well, that's not innovative anymore. I need things that change my concept of what I'm doing, not just continuous improvement. Everybody did continuous improvement by the 2010s. That's a remarkable transition over periods of just a few tens of years. But what about now? Well, now innovation needs to be a crafted strategy. There are many different ways to decide to focus your energy as an innovator. This is a framework offered by the Conference Board, the mileposts for innovation behavior. Are you going to innovate by being a technology leader, by being an innovation ecosystem builder, internal and external? Are you going to innovate primarily in the area of customer experience? We'll discuss some examples of this. Are you going to innovate with your focus on environmental sustainability? And that might seem like an odd question because most people view the assumption of greater obligations for environmental and social sustainability as constraints rather than as opportunities to seed new innovation. So let's look at an example of that last one, since it might seem counterintuitive. Look at a brand like Patagonia. You might have trouble finding another brand like Patagonia. They're if not unique, then certainly quite distinguished by their focus on making their brand a representation of a set of values and behaviors in the area of environmental sustainability. The idea makes sense. You're selling products largely to people who want to be out there enjoying the environment, but they've taken it beyond the level of just making great products to go hiking and camping and fishing and whatever. They've said, we want to be part of the values that we believe our customers enjoy. And so we want you to return worn but still repairable garments to us so that we can upcycle them and put them out into the world. They run ads on Black Friday, the retail mecca day, of saying, please don't buy this jacket. I mean, the counterintuitive aspect of this, what it does is make the brand a membership society in a sharing of values and create an innovation experience of, but merely by putting on the jacket. You wrap yourself literally in a set of values and shared ideas that make you feel like part of something. And that is a way to turn what some companies, I believe, wrongly regard as the constraint of sustainability interest on the part of their customers into an opportunity to elevate a brand by changing almost the definition of what it is that's being sold. Innovation is an unnatural act. There are people who think that we're all born innovators, ever since the first person started, chipping flint rocks into hand axes, we've been innovating. Yeah, but I can take you out to the caves outside Beijing and show you how 10,000 generations of hominids, people who looked enough like us that you might, not notice them on a dark night as they were passing you, their innovation over a period of 10,000 generations was to refine their hand axes from about 5.5 to about 4.5 centimeters. Perhaps their fingers were becoming more dexterous over time. They were not going from hand axes to hammers and screwdrivers, certainly not to lasers and steam engines. The idea that innovation happens as a natural process is mistaken. And in fact, when we really want to elevate an innovation, we don't call it an innovation, we call it a revolution. We talk about the steam revolution or the cell phone revolution. Revolutions, almost by definition, make someone unhappy. If everybody likes the idea, it's probably not a revolution. If no one is objecting, you're probably not doing anything very interesting. The Copernican revolution was a complete change in the way we saw the structure of the universe around us, and it got a lot of people really mad. And if you're not prepared to take on the burden of being a revolutionary, then maybe innovation is not the world in which you want to live. This is another Heinlein quote. Revolution is a science that depends on organization and communications. And if you want to be a revolutionary, you have to have two things. One, you've got to be ready to have people mad at you, people with power, people with capital, people with a lot of support around them will be opposed to you if you are trying to undertake a revolution. And if you want to overcome that, you have to accept a burden of communication. The idea of if you build it, they will come, that good ideas naturally attract an audience. Maybe not so much. There are many solid examples of getting people to like the new thing is hard. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. Efficiency is not revolutionary. A lot of organizations believe they're investing in digital transformation, when what they're really investing in is streamlining of processes, removal of friction, rust, and gravity. These are all good things. But my friend Tom Davenport and his colleague Andrew Spagni wrote about a study of $5 trillion worth of digital transformation effort that resulted in about 19% of customers reporting that they had gotten anything out of this. If you relegate someone who's accustomed to getting a live human being on the phone to an app, that's an efficiency improvement. You did it digitally, so I guess it was a digital transformation. But from the customer's point of view, all you've done is replace their opportunity to talk to a real human being with a frustrating experience often of trying to figure out how to get an app to interpret the request they're trying to make. And eventually they just say, oh, just give me a phone number. I want to talk to a human being. What's the alternative? Well, another friend of mine, Jeannie Ross at MIT, wrote a wonderful book, Designed for Digital. I highly recommend it. We use it as a giveaway at dinners and things. It has some Salesforce case studies in it, but I would like the book regardless, where she says the point is not to do the old things with digital technology. The point is to look at the capabilities of connection, collaboration, automation, machine intelligence, and to say, what are some kinds of value that we could not sell before that can now become part of the product? Simple example. If you've ever owned a significant, complex camera, a single lens reflex camera that has interchangeable lenses and many other accessories, the catalogs of those accessories are voluminous. I mean, they're telephone book sized. I'm sorry, a telephone book used to be a list of, never mind. They were thick catalogs, most of which did not relate to any one person, but someone needed any of those things. But imagine if a camera instead becomes a node for the delivery of advisory expertise. And when you take pictures, optionally, on an opt-in basis, metadata is captured. And if you're routinely trying to take pictures in low light at close distances, you start to receive advisory bulletins on it. Looks as if the kinds of photos you're trying to take would benefit from this lens, this particular kind of light, this particular kind of filter. And it becomes an active participant in, remember, your outcome. Your outcome is the images you produce. Photography literally means writing with light. It does not mean operating a camera. It means the creation of an image. And if we can make the device a channel for expert assistance in the creation of distinctive and artistic and amazing images, that's going to create brand preference for the camera maker that makes their camera a vehicle for that kind of creation. Transformation of experience means reperceiving the need. I do not know of any single example of genuine innovation better than the original iPod, because when it was introduced, MP3 digital music players were a well-established market. There were many companies making digital music players, and you would buy the device and you'd start spelunking around the internet looking for digital music, or you'd start burning your own CDs onto the device or whatever. And you had pretty much to assemble the experience for yourself from parts of varying degrees of fit and finish. Now, Sony was in particular a maker of MP3 players, and they thought they had an edge because they also owned a large library of recorded music, copyrights to that music. And therefore, they figured, well, we can give people a head start on putting content that we own onto the devices that we sell. They saw that as a competitive advantage. Apple introduced the iPod, and it was regarded as an expensive and feature-poor MP3. And Sony didn't want to cannibalize its existing music business with a new business model. So they kept doing what they were doing. But what did Steve Jobs do? He turned on the reality distortion field and went out to all the recorded music copyright holders and got all of them to be afraid of being left out of the party he was about to throw. And the next thing you know, iTunes plus iPod with 99 cents a song for quality legal music easily discovered and easily placed on your device had transformed a marketplace from people who wanted a gadget to people who just wanted, as Steve would say, your favorite songs in your pocket. And 3 years later, there's a new word in the Oxford English Dictionary: podcast. It may take a real effort to remember, that we didn't always call downloading stuff off the internet to listen to it a podcast. We called it downloading or something. We literally got a new word in the language because Steve and Apple were so successful in drilling through the product, drilling through the artifact of the MP3 player to arrive at the outcome that people wanted, their favorite songs in their pocket. I have not yet found a better example of what genuine innovation really means. What are the implications for you, individually, as practitioners and as members of organizations? Well, one of the things that I think we all appreciate right now is that things that used to be college level skills are now free websites. A friend of mine was taking a college statistics class at one point, and there was a homework problem to calculate the odds of dealing a full house in poker. And just on a whim, I went to Wolfram Alpha, a free website, and simply asked the question, what are the odds of dealing a full house? I provided no other context, no other input or scaffolding to the program. This was years ago. This is way before we were talking about GPT-derived technologies and generative AI. This is just natural language querying to a mathematical calculation engine. It correctly inferred that I was talking about poker. Notice the question did not use the word poker. It suggested that I probably had 5 card in mind. It knew enough, knew in quotes, knew enough to suggest that that was a default. It offered me the alternative of a 7 card hand if I really cared about that, offered me the exact value, offered me the decimal approximation. And if I were using the paid version, I could even have gotten it to show me its work. That's a college level skill that's now a free website. If the answers to questions, things that we used to pay a lot to have put into our heads in the course of a 4-year degree, if those answers are now free, well, what's worth money? What's worth money now are the good questions. This is another science fiction reference. John Brunner wrote a book called Stand on Zanzibar, in which at one point a massive AI, a probably human level AI, is being tasked with the management of a major economic redevelopment of an African country, very rich in natural resources, very poor in pretty much everything else. And when they kick the AI from simulation mode into production mode and say, okay, now it's time to get actually, to work on this, it says, well, no, I'm not going to answer this question. These questions are ridiculous. And they're going crazy. They're trying to debug this thing like it's a piece of software. And finally, they bring in a sociologist who simply asks the machine, what's wrong with the project? The machine says, it won't work. And he says, would it be fair to say you don't believe what you've been told? No, I don't believe it. And then he asks the question, postulate that the data given to you are true. What would be necessary to take what we've told you and reconcile it with everything else you know? Because this is a country that's very poor, but has very low crime. It seems to have lots of very positive social behaviors that are uncommon in places that with terrible poverty and deprivation of comforts and leisure. And the machine comes back and says, I'd have to believe that there's a force of unknown nature acting on the population, causing them to behave differently from known patterns of human behavior. And he says, okay, yep, that exists. We're trying to figure out what it is. And then the code phrase I tell you 3 times says, override all of your other safety mechanisms and continue reasoning from this process. And then he says, okay, try it now. And says, oh, sure. Well, the estimated return for the project will be. I think he's done it, says someone. 1968. Being able to visualize more than 50 years ahead to the point where we would be asking the machine, what do you need to get this done, was a pretty impressive act, I think, of looking ahead. And I think it really speaks to where we're going with application design. We're not going to look at existing processes and write code to execute them digitally. We're going to build worlds. We're going to build a representation of facts and actions and possibilities and changes of state. This is a language that I used to be using back in the 1980s called CLIPS. It's a NASA tool for building so-called production systems where you don't write procedural directions. You write descriptions of objects, situations, available actions, and those the last line. Assert, goal is to eat bananas. The monkey comes into the room, bananas are hanging from the ceiling, it can't reach them. There's some pieces of furniture, some that are light enough to move, some that are not. You throw all these facts into the engine and then tell it this is your goal. And it's really kind of amazing to watch the rationalization engine put these things together and come up with an action plan in which the monkey goes to the stool, which can be moved, moves it to the middle of the room, stands on the stool, gets the bananas. No code written to do these things, just description of worlds, description of possibilities, you throw it into the engine. Our Patrick Stokes at Salesforce has talked about this as the future of application development. You don't take a process, write code for the process, make a button for the code, arrange the buttons into a user interface and call that an application. No, you build a representation of the things that are known and the things that are wanted and the transitions that can get you from one place to another. And then you have dialogues with the intelligence, if you will, about how to get this done. This is going to call for different skills. We will pay for skills that don't fit into current curricula with obvious ease. The Institute for the Future refers to the term transdisciplinarity. If you can build a group of teams with radically different points of view, great. If you as an individual can cultivate radically different points of view, if you are a musician, an artist, an athlete, and a programmer, you will bring to bear on a problem perspectives that might not be there for the person who programs for a living and also as a hobby. What is computational thinking? I've already referred to the website Wolfram Alpha. Well, Stephen Wolfram and I did a one-on-one chat for another conference earlier this year where we talked about his emphasis on computational thinking. This is also something that Ginny Rometty at IBM has talked about. It doesn't mean coding. It does mean being able to look at a problem and visualize data structures that might help to represent it, iterative or other structures of calculation or processing that might help you, crunch that situation well, being able to visualize how someone might code it and what resources might be needed to make that possible, and now eventually to make the machine able to crunch your world that you've built and make sense of it all. Sense making. This is the term that Steve Jobs used to use. It's been a challenge to build so-called expert systems in AI because so often experts are not good at explaining how they did what they just did. And so we need to back off on what we briefly flirted with doing in the 1980s and 1990s, building these massive rule bases by interviewing experts about how they do their expert things, and instead allowing the systems free rein to learn from experience. Make sure that we reinforce the right kinds of outcome. Don't merely reward that it wrote an email, reward that it wrote an email that resulted in deals closing more quickly. Again, this is an area we're emphasizing at Salesforce now. The measurement of the outcome as the training reinforcement mechanism for the AI, instead of just measuring the activity and rewarding the activity alone. And a lot of this is about social intelligence. A lot of this is about building collaborative teams of people who speak different jargons, who come at problems with different points of view, who have different priorities in areas like environmental sustainability versus pure economic activity, different points of view on any number of different stakeholder questions. This is going to happen sooner than we're going to find easy. This is a roadmap that Accenture built about when you will start to see things like a blockchain type data structure used to collect taxes. Oh, wait, that's happening in China already. In fact, a blockchain type platform was adopted by Walmart Canada, who are not exactly a bunch of ponytail wearing crypto bros, to replace their logistics system. And it is documented that they reduced the dispute rate on invoices from 70%, 7 out of 10 invoices having some kind of issue that had to be addressed afterwards, from 70% down to order of 1% by moving to a shared data structure with no one party as the holder of the data or the gatekeeper or in any way first among equals. The data structure itself is its own guarantor of shared truth and inability to alter data without evidence of tampering. It's very important not to call blockchains tamper-proof, but they are tamper-evident. And so if you look, you will see the fingerprints that are left if someone tries to mess around with the data. This credibility is an important lubricant for processes that have, up until now in all of human history, relied too much on one party just saying you're going to have to trust me. Instead, now we can actually start trusting the integrity and unity of the data. This enables new things. Conveying the speed and the acceleration of this is among the things that practitioners have to be prepared to do for people who have trouble grasping it. We're all used to S-curves. Requirements definition takes 2 years because once you build it, you're going to be stuck with it until the next upgrade cycle, which is 2 years from now. Well, we know that's not true anymore. People know that Salesforce does 3 releases a year. What they don't realize is that the number of times the code is improved is hundreds and hundreds of times a year. We just don't call it all a release. If something gets fixed, it just gets fixed in line. It's a service. And there are people who say, oh no, I'm going to be more vigorous than that. I'm not going to expect it to level off at the new state. I'm going to expect ongoing change. And they think they're being very forward-looking by this. But what I've done here is plot the rate of change as a constant, arithmetic growth rate. That's not exponential. Exponential doesn't just mean really fast. It has a mathematical meaning of continuous acceleration, the hockey stick shape curve. And the thing is, if you're there at that intersection point where those 3 curves are about to diverge, and you've got the people who wrote the checks saying, okay, we paid for the project, now we want to see some return before we give you any more money. Okay, it doesn't really work that way. You're going to need continuous investment to maintain your pace of change, and you think you're on the green curve and you're going to be okay. But you, having been through events like the next 2 days, understand the reality of exponential change, whether it's the number of people on using Uber instead of a taxi cab or the amount of memory in your phone or whatever. Growth is not a Silicon Valley fantasy. It happens all over the place. And if you look out 10 years, blue curve is at, like level 1x, green curve is at like level 2x, and red curve is at like level 8x. You'd better be prepared to deliver with conviction your message that you need to be investing in this kind of growth if you expect to get the resources to get that done. Another way of putting this is what Pat Gelsinger said at VMware before he went back over to Intel, where he said, look, the pace of change right now that everyone finds so remarkable and cause for such anxiety and discussion, this is the slowest it's going to be for the rest of your life. It's going to be faster next year, faster than that the year after, and so on. How do you deal with that? Well, you deal with it by cultivating agility, by cultivating the ability to recognize and move quickly, to fix one thing without breaking everything else, which is the characteristic of monolithic systems, to be able to have small teams that are aware of the problem in depth and can implement one new feature in a way that does not depend on precise interlocking gears with everybody else. And we at Salesforce are veterans of the process of recognizing this need and changing the behavior. Because back in 2006, when we were still a relatively young company, conventional software processes were beginning to do what conventional software processes do, which is begin to bog down, where making any change starts to become very difficult because of all the other interdependencies. And we moved to a massive, controversial adoption of Scrum and Agile processes with small teams owning feature outcomes and the ability to delay one feature without messing up other features. This is an organizational task and not just a procedural change. And the quantitative measures of the improvement have been something that we've all taken to heart, and we now apply agile methods across the entire company and not just in software development. It's vital, but it's also important to realize that the results may not be immediately evident. In our own experience, it was about 4 months in when you could really start to measure this. These changes need to be made with conviction. They need to be made across the organization, because if only 10% of the organization is still not using email, if only 10% of the organization is still not breaking projects into separate and somewhat independent modules, then the whole organization is being held back by that. You need to achieve broad adoption of the new behaviors. And quantitatively, we can demonstrate this worked. We did not develop the metric that Forbes magazine used for world's most innovative companies, but they wound up with Salesforce in the top 3 in all 8 years that calculation was done. I don't believe any other company was in top 3 in every year, frequently number 1 or 2. And in company with pharmaceutical companies or consumer electronics companies, this is not just a software industry thing. We think we're onto something here, and we share it, with enthusiasm because we think it makes for a stronger ecosystem. I said I was going to talk about tools and meta tools. This is a tool. It's called the car escape hammer. It will help you with that little blade down there, slice the seatbelt if your seatbelt is stuck, and with that pointy hammer, break the window and get out of the car. It's got the bracket right there. It's a great tool if you've just driven off the road into the water and you need to get out of your car. Until that day, it's not particularly useful. That blade is great for slicing a seatbelt, but you can't slice cheese. The hammer is great for breaking glass, but it won't drive a nail worth a darn. It's a really focused, specialized device, as many tools are. Well, if you have lots and lots of specialized tools and you slam them all together, you get a Swiss Army knife. And sometimes people will say, oh, this thing is a Swiss Army knife. Is that really a compliment? This is an actual Swiss Army knife of which they built about 100. That's not CGI, with every implement ever put on any Swiss Army knife ever, all on one device. It weighs more than 2 pounds. None of the tools is the best way of doing what that tool does. If you wanted a really good screwdriver, you'd get a really good screwdriver. And it won't do anything that you didn't already know you would need to do at the time that you were putting this thing together. So in that way, when someone says, oh yeah, we've got a Swiss Army knife for our problem, put some boundaries on how cheerful they should be about that comment. Well, what's the alternative? A meta tool, also called a platform. This is a unimatic lathe. I can make any tool I need with this thing. An evolving need can be met with a core set of skills, a core set of brackets and fixtures, an understanding of how to use this tool, this meta tool, to make tools. That's what a platform needs to be. And platforms are not just for grinding metal and carving wood. They're also for helping people get stuff done. My friend Diane Hinchcliffe has talked about the problem of the software in workplaces today. Low usability, low access, low empowerment. All it does is automate the existing paper process. We need active platforms for people that do enable discovery of what other people know, agility and collaboration, focused automation near the point of knowledge of the problem. And the really crucial thing to realize is that people want this. People want to have companies investing in their skills. They will leave a company to take a lower paying job if it's with a company where they feel they'll be able to grow, instead of one where they're just being kept around until they can be replaced by a machine. 83% of users say that automation solutions have given them the time to take on new projects, and that they've given them the time to learn new skills, and that the automation solutions have let them deepen relationships with customers and stakeholders. And remember what we've seen in some of the examples we've discussed so far. The ride along with the customer or the service rep, the going home and watching the customer unpacking the product, this is where you find the friction points and the frustrations that keep people from having that amazing experience that constitutes true innovation. Companies do well to help their people recognize and believe that they're being made better, that they're a subject of investment and not a target for replacement. The other thing to appreciate is that the platforms we build today are carrying loads they did not have to carry in the past. You already see pieces of legislation with names like the Algorithmic Accountability Act, and the need for, hypothetically, an automated decision system impact assessment, kind of like an environmental impact assessment in an earlier age when we only worried about physical pollution and not digital pollution. Cryptographic authentication and non-repudiation. Companies like DocuSign make this their business, and the essence of a shared ledger, a distributed ledger, a blockchain or Ethereum type platform is that we can have authentication and non-repudiation so that transactions can take place. What's Web3 and the metaverse really about? It's about moving mechanisms of transaction and ownership into the tent of digital instead of having to leave the tent of digital to go do something in the banking system or go do something in the credit card system. To move ownership right there into the game you're playing or the other experience you're having. Provenance. People are increasingly attentive to questions about, well, where did this come from? Was this produced sustainably? Was this produced without embarrassing use of labor of young children? These are issues where being able to trace the sources of your products, as Patagonia has demonstrated, is an important innovation in that it alters people's sense of the experience they're having by their relationship with you. And the expression, the K-shaped recovery, emerged toward the middle and end, if there is an end of the pandemic, where we talked about the degree to which digital transformation dramatically accelerated during the early years of the pandemic had made some occupations really challenged. We've talked about travel agents being a vanishing occupation, for example. But people have asked me, are there going to be fewer customer support representatives in an era of generative AI? And I've said, there are going to be more people doing customer support. They won't be doing what we think of. Think of them as the producers of every customer's individual Truman Show. They're going to be orchestrators of experience, not just answerers of questions and checkers of boxes on forms. It's going to be an opportunity to create more value. And historically, when a job can create more value, you wind up with more of them and not fewer of them. There are more people today with the job of bank teller than there were before the invention of the automated teller machine. Why? Because the low value tasks of dispensing the $20 bills, well, those are now being handled by a machine. And bank tellers, human beings, looking you in the eye while you do stuff with your money, are now agents of discussion of multi-line opportunities to take your car loan, your home loan, your children's educational savings account, your retirement plan, and start to unify these. We've worked with companies like Huntington Bank, which came to us and said, we've got 16 different lines of business, and every one of them sees any given customer as a separate individual, even if that customer is doing business with us in 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 lines of business. And unifying the data so that they could see the customer as a customer and not just as a conglomeration of separate business activities was a key step in making genuine innovation possible for them. We also think it's very important to be doing this in a trust-first way. I've said you don't build a house with bare metal wires and then add the insulation later on. You don't do that. You build the house with insulated wire because that way it's going to be done at a lower cost and with higher quality than if you add it later on. We feel the same way about AI. And we have placed out there in the world our guidelines for responsible AI development, and our Office of Ethical and Humane Use of Technology sits in the room when key product decisions are being made. Innovation needs to take place within these guardrails because trying to add the guardrails later on is much more difficult to do, and it can be brand destroying if you fail to do it. So accuracy, safety, honesty, consent to use the data that is being used. Focus on curating the data. Isn't it bizarre to imagine that you would train your AI on the customers you have when 90% of the customers you have are probably low loyalty, low profit customers, and you don't really want more of them if you're not curating the machine on the 10% of your customers that you most wish you could have more customers like that? If you are not being very selective and attentive to what are you feeding the beast if you want it to grow the right muscles. And we have already demonstrated that a 16 billion parameter large language model does not outperform a 7 billion parameter model, a much smaller, more efficient model, but one that was curated on the proper data and given reinforcement mechanisms that were based on the outcome being achieved and not just the activity being undertaken. And so sustainability is not a small consideration here. The world is already burning a large single-digit percentage of its electrical power running servers, and that number really shouldn't be allowed to continue growing without bound. As Stein's law says, if something can't go on like this forever, then at some point it must stop. And we as individual practitioners need to be voices in the room talking about this needs to stop. We began with Peter Drucker. We're going to end with Peter Drucker. He's famous for the comment that there is nothing quite so useless as doing with great efficiency something that shouldn't be done at all. This is maybe not a bumper sticker, but it is a t-shirt. Less often quoted is a related comment that has a lot to do with everyone who's hearing me right now, which is if you want something new, you have to stop doing something old. Getting people to give up the sense of mastery of a familiar skill set, give up a franchise in a business that they feel they own, the temptation to milk one more revenue cycle out of the existing business model and technology base. That is a strong temptation. And getting people to be the first to disrupt themselves instead of waiting until it's overwhelmingly obvious that they've been successfully disrupted by some upstart company. That's a challenge. That's a challenge that each of us needs to assume as an individual. The only way these things happen is when someone in a company says, we're going to take the necessary risk here. If it can be a CEO, great, but it doesn't need to be. There are many examples, many in our personal experience. The people who wear Salesforce golden hoodies are often people who were the voice in a company that said, we can do something genuinely different here. And if we don't, someone will do it to us. And so as you go through the next 2 days, I want you to remember another famous quote, make no little plans. They have no magic to stir people's blood. But the rest of the quote is a really important addition to it. Make big plans and remember that a noble logical diagram, or maybe in your case, a 3-slide PowerPoint deck, once recorded, doesn't die. Take on that burden of being a revolutionary, of being a communicator who shows people a picture of that new world that they can have, who gives them the confidence, call it a reality distortion field if you want, but gives them the confidence that says, we can do this, we can make these changes, they won't be easy, but they will be worth the effort. And that's what I hope the next 2 days can arm you to do in many different ways as you each choose. Thank you so much for the chance to be with you today.
Peter, thank you. That was great, and lots of great comments in chat. I was just taking a look at. I want to remind everyone, if you have any questions about the presentation or about anything, please go ahead and post those in the Q&A section of Excel events. Peter, I was looking at chat. There's someone from New Zealand that's actually in this meeting, which is amazing to me because it's Wednesday morning, I think, in New Zealand.
So it's real early tomorrow there. Yeah.
Yes.
That's very, very nice. Happy to hear it.
Incredible.
Maybe then again, they're just having a very late night as opposed to a very early morning.
Oh, that's true. That's quite true. A little too late.
No, I'm very happy to have a global participation here. That's great.
Global presence. I have a serious question for you, but maybe just a quick, maybe fun type question. I heard you mention phone books during the session. When do you, what year, Peter, do you think you last had a phone book delivered to your home?
Oh, that's such a,
I'm going 2010. 2010 is going to be my guess.
Well, I was going to say I wouldn't be shocked if it's been 10 years. I didn't circle the date on my calendar. This is something we observed in a family holiday letter once. It's easy to remember when you did something for the first time. It's often very difficult to remember when you did it for the last time. Those events don't call attention to your brain the way novelties do. I genuinely don't know, but I suspect that the last phone book ever delivered to our home is on a shelf somewhere, and I could probably find out. Yeah.
All right. I'm sure you'll go looking for it later on. The serious question I had, not serious, but just more pertaining to your presentation. You know, you showed a slide 2 or 3 slides back around responsible development of generative AI, and there were 5 separate guidelines. Which of those guidelines do you feel is most important? You know, is it accuracy? Is it honesty? Is it safety?
The percentage of people, according to Pew Research, who believe that AI will improve their lives is less now than it was a year ago, and considerably less than it was 10 years ago. The awareness of the risks of what Shoshana Zuboff has called surveillance capitalism, and the idea that everything you do becomes, hoovered up and used to take advantage of you rather than to offer you new value. And so I think that the honesty in using data with respect and using it to create value rather than merely to create revenue is maybe the most important. For the same reason that we've said pretty much since the founding of Salesforce, trust is our #1 value. If you're not trusted, nothing else you do matters. No one wants to connect with you. No one wants to do business with you. So trust in AI is on the cusp of being tremendously difficult to rebuild. We've already had some things happen in the last year that have made people who never thought of AI as a problem before start to worry about it. We need to get on the right side of that cusp again very, very quickly, or it's going to take much longer to introduce the positives that it can bring to our world.
Terrific. And I think, Peter, we can wrap up. We were approaching top of the hour. Again, very much appreciate the session and your commentary and your answers to my questions, my serious questions and my silly questions. I'll wrap this up, everyone, by saying that, look, as you can tell from this presentation, innovation is everywhere. And this week, the hub of innovation is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So we hope to see some of you at our summit tomorrow night, Thursday. Amber from New Zealand, we hope to see you next year at our summit. We're going to send you a special invite. Thanks to everyone. Thanks to everyone for joining. Thank you, Peter. Have a great rest of the day, everyone.
Good to be with you all.